Welcome to the 2023 Anzac address of the Department of General Surgery at Middlemore Hospital. As always, our theme is one of remembrance, and this year we look at an important event in 1943. 1943 saw victory of the Allies over the German and Italian forces in North Africa, which opened up Italy to the war effort, and indeed the conclusion of the Mussolini Empire. It also saw important advances in the fight against the Japanese in the Pacific and the extraordinary uprising of 400,000 Polish Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto against their Nazi exterminators. This year we will focus on aspects of the Royal Air Force who were able really for the first time to significantly take the war to Germany. The air battle of the Ruhr lasted for a period of some 4 months or so. And it was men like these that were prepared to give up their today for our tomorrow. In this photo, top left as we look at it, is the New Zealand pilot of 617 Squadron, Les Munro. Why then were the RAF instructed to focus so heavily on the Ruhr? It was simply because of the importance of this area to the German war industry. The Krupp's armament factory at Essen itself covered a massive 5 square kilometres. The Ruhr contained at least 10 synthetic fuel plants, and aviation fuel was predominantly produced within the Ruhr. The Ruhr made up the vast majority of steel and coal production in the German economy, and hydroelectric dams offered an enormous amount of power to the German electricity grid. All up, around 3 million people lived within the boundaries of the Ruhr. It was because of this strategic importance to Germany's war effort that the Ruhr became of critical importance to the Allies. By 1943, there was a desperate need to curtail German industrial production, and Britain really only had one option in this aim. That was the use of extensive heavy bombing. But this was high risk, and indeed earlier in the war, efforts to bomb German industry had needed to be severely curtailed due to unacceptably high losses of planes and crews. It was only really made realistic by the development of the Lancaster and by improved navigational and tactical aids. Some of these aids were electronic in nature, but these brought with them the risk that German advances would allow German night fighter aircraft to hone in on the bomber fleet themselves. It was indeed a very high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The Lancaster, therefore, was essential to taking the war to Germany. It was crewed by 7 men. It was very large and capable of very extensive distances and heavy bomb loads, rising in fact to over 10,000 kilograms later in the war. Fully laden, it had a ceiling height of 21,500 feet and could fly at 245 knots. Starting at the front of the plane, just below the cockpit, right at the front, is the bomb aimer, who also acted as the front gunner. The pilot and flight engineer, followed by the navigator and wireless operator, made up the front 5 positions. The mid-turret gunner can just be seen above the RAF symbol near the rear of the plane, and right at the rear is Tail End Charlie, the tail gunner. The Lancaster bomber had essentially 2 aims: to deliver destruction to the enemy and to see the crew return safely to Britain. It was a no-frills experience, and conditions in the plane were very cramped. There are only 2 ways out: one at the very front in the floor of the bomb aimer compartment and one at the rear door. Movement up and down the fuselage, however, was very difficult due to the construction of the plane, in particular the central spar where the wings came together. The black and white photograph on our left is looking toward the cockpit, and we see the wireless operator in position with his bank of instruments. In front of him you can see a chair at right angles. This would be the position of the navigator, who in flight would generally be behind blackout curtains. Further forward would be the flight engineer and then the captain of the plane. The colour photograph shows the pilot cockpit area, and you'll note the ladder on the right. Down through this area is entrance to the bomb aimer compartment. This is where there is also the 26-inch square exit hatch, which you can imagine the challenges of reaching in an out-of-control bomber in the dark with extraordinary fear, and all the time hoping your parachute is successfully going to deploy. Germany's military empire had extended all the way to the English Channel by mid-1940, and they had used the time since to heavily construct defences throughout Western Europe and, of course, Germany itself. Anti-aircraft flak batteries, such as the one shown, were capable of propelling shells full of shrapnel to extraordinary heights, well above the maximum ceiling of any RAF aircraft. They had developed effective use of radar and the ability to hone in on British bomber forces, and they had recognised the need to increase the number of fighter defensive aircraft, particularly equipped for night flying. The Germans had also built decoy factories, and indeed earlier in the war, the majority of British bombs that were used to attack the Krupp's factory at Essen fell in fact on the decoy factory several miles away. This brings us to Operation Chastise, better known as the Dam Busters Raid. It is undoubtedly the most famous air raid of the war. It was conducted by the newly formed 617 Squadron in May 1943, and this photograph is of the Möhne Dam in the Ruhr. I'd ask you to note the two towers on the dam, because these were actually essential to its destruction, because they allowed the RAF to develop a simple means to judge its distance of each bomber from the dam face. It was an extraordinary feat of airmanship, and indeed in recent years the RAF's modern bomber crews and flight simulators have tried to repeat this exercise. It has been almost impossible for modern airmen to achieve what the squadron in 1943 did. It was commanded by Guy Gibson, and they managed to destroy two major dams over the Ruhr. Gibson's dog was killed on the day the aircraft were preparing to fly, and he ordered the mess sergeant to have his dog buried at precisely midnight. This is poignant because Gibson felt at midnight he'd be over the dams and likely to be killed himself. This is the bouncing bomb. It was developed by scientist Barnes Wallace, and it's sitting under Gibson's aircraft, G for George, prior to the flight. You can just make out a small chain on the right side of this bomb. That was to ensure the bomb was spinning at the correct revolutions as it was dropped. This was important because the bomb needed to literally bounce across the water, avoiding the torpedo nets. It would then strike the face of the dam, sink to a specified height where a hydrostatic fuse would detonate the bomb. The pressures of the shock wave in the lake was aimed to destroy the dam. This had to be done at precise distance from the dam face and at precise speed and height. The height was judged by the coalescence of two lights forming a circle on the water. Of course, this gave away the position of the bomber to the German defenders. It was no simple task undertaking this raid. The pilots had to avoid German radar by flying no more than 50 feet above the ground. They then had to avoid numerous German flak batteries and hazards such as electricity wires and innumerable church steeples. Precision at the target was essential, and the Möhne Dam itself was heavily defended. To achieve this extraordinary feat, Gibson planned for 3 waves, taking differing routes. The first wave, which contained the largest number of bombers, was to attack the Möhne Dam. Gibson attacked first and released his bomb just on midnight. He then repeatedly flew across the dam to draw the fire of the enemy gunners while subsequent aircraft attacked. The second and third bombers in also managed to release their bombs, but the second aircraft was destroyed as its bomb was released. The bomb didn't hit the dam face, instead it skimmed over the top, but it did destroy the hydroelectric pumping station on the opposite side of the dam. The third aircraft was severely damaged, but managed to achieve good positioning of the bomb. However, it was noted that the fourth aircraft got the bomb in the perfect position, and the fifth bomb did the job, breaching the dam completely. Gibson then ordered the crews onto the Ida Dam, which was breached and attacked after multiple efforts. There was some extraordinary airmanship involved here to get the bomber into position because of the geography of the dam. The Sorpe and Ennepe dams were then attacked, and whilst damaged, neither were breached. The Dam Busters raid, extraordinary as it was not without a heavy cost. Of the 19 aircraft involved, 3 were forced to return without reaching the dams, including Les Munro. It It was the only time in Munro's extraordinary career of over 60 flights into enemy territory that his aircraft was ever hit by flak, but it took out his internal communications. It also took out his ability to communicate with the raid leader, and it took out the hydraulics to the rear gunner, leaving him utterly exposed to German attack. There was no way Gibson could communicate with the bomb aimer to know he was at the correct height or distance from the dam face. He therefore returned to base. 5 other aircraft were lost on the way to the dams, either shot down or crashed into wires or church steeples. 1 was lost at the Mourner and 2 on the way back. Therefore, only 11 aircraft made it to the dams, and the destruction of 2 is an extraordinary feat of airmanship. Of the 8 bombers lost, there were no survivors in 6, but incredibly 2 survived from the bomber that was shot down as it released its bomb over the Mourner. These men bailed out at no more than 200 feet. A 3rd man also managed to bail out but died of his injuries on reaching the ground. 1 other airman survived a crash landing when his bomber was en route to the dams. Therefore, 53 of the 133 airmen who left England never returned. An extraordinary cost. Overall, the Battle of the Ruhr by the RAF in 1943 achieved many of its objectives, but it came at a significant cost, with 581 bombers out of the 14,000 or so sorties flown not returning. The effect on German war production was significant, but sadly did not last. Even the Dambusters raid, successful as it was, did not indefinitely destroy the German war production of the region. But there was a very important Allied boost to morale. At last the British people saw the war could be taken to the Germans. The most important aspect of the battle was probably its lasting effects throughout the war on the German military planning and tactics. Massive numbers of German troops were withdrawn from frontline activity to defence of the homeland. The Ruhr battle did not end the need to take the war to Germany, and the men of Bomber Command continued night after night to fly deep into Germany throughout the remainder of the war. The cost on the bomber offensive over Germany was high. Of the Lancasters alone, 44% were shot down, and only 35 aircraft made over 100 flights. The average life expectancy of a bomber crew was only 21 missions, and in total Bomber Command lost 55,500 flyers. When we consider the wounded and those captured, 60% of all flyers were casualties. Approximately 6,000 New Zealanders flew in Bomber Command throughout the war, and 1 in 3 did not return. Therefore, on Anzac Day this year, as we should every year, pause to remember. Remember those who served, in particular those who never returned, but always reflect on their sacrifice so that we enjoy our freedom. They did indeed give their today for our tomorrow.